Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So, 2,000 years before the iPhone was even a concept, an ancient text perfectly diagnosed, like the exact neurological loop that makes you check your notifications 80 times a day.
Yeah, it's honestly a little uncanny when you really look at it.
Right. It doesn't just offer these, soothing platitudes. It actually hands you a scalpel and basically asks you to perform surgery on your own mind. So today, we're embarking on a massive excavation of ancient psychological mastery. We're doing a deep dive into chapters 21 through 24 of the Dhammapada.
Which are incredible chapters, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. Specifically, we're looking at the sections titled Miscellaneous, The Downward Course, The Elephant, and Thirst. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore how this incredibly old framework tackles the unruly human mind, the trap of endless desire, and the difficult, often painful path to ultimate mental freedom.
It is a phenomenal mission, and, well, I think people are going to be shocked by how relevant this all is. I mean, we are looking at a text compiled well over 2 millennia ago, emerging from this very specific spiritual and ascetic landscape of ancient India.
Yeah.
Yet it reads as though it were written, like, yesterday morning. It diagnoses the exact ailments of our modern human condition with a precision that just borders on eerie.
It really is eerie. It's as if the author had a time machine. They looked at our modern attention economy, observed our burnout culture, saw us all doom scrolling in bed at 2 a.m., and then went back to write these exact chapters.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We have this baseline hum of anxiety today, this relentless, exhausting pursuit of the next big thing, right? And this text essentially says, yes, I see that. Here's exactly why that is happening to you, and here's how you dismantle it.
And to dismantle it, we first have to understand the architecture of the problem as the text presents it. If we want to extract the practical value for our daily life, we really have to start at the absolute center of the author's worldview. Because everything in these 4 chapters...
The learnings, the practices.
Yeah, all the striking metaphors, it all revolves around one core, undeniable concept, which is the nature of human desire. Or, as the Dhammapada powerfully translates it, thirst.
Right. Chapter 24 is entirely dedicated to this concept of thirst. And what struck me immediately is the choice of that specific word.
It's very deliberate.
Yeah, because it's not called wanting or preference. Thirst implies this biological imperative. If you're thirsty, you can't simply choose to ignore it for very long.
No, you really can't.
It's a desperate, consuming, almost violent need.
And that biological intensity is entirely the point. The text uses thirst, which, represents craving, unchecked desire, or just relentless grasping as the fundamental root cause of human suffering. Yeah. Verse 334 outlines this brilliant botanical metaphor. It says, "The thirst of a thoughtless man grows like a creeper. He runs from life to life, like a monkey seeking fruit in the forest."
I want to pause on that creeper metaphor because it's incredibly vivid.
Oh, it's terrifying if you know what it means.
Right, because a creeper vine doesn't just grow passively next to a tree, it's parasitic.
Exactly. The biological accuracy of that metaphor is what makes it so intense. If you observe a creeper vine in a dense forest, it starts as this tiny, almost invisible tendril at the base of a massive, sturdy tree.
It seems entirely harmless.
Exactly. But it slowly, imperceptibly wraps around the host. Over years, it feeds off the tree's resources, constricts its trunk, and eventually can suffocate and just pull down the entire tree.
That's wild.
And the text is telling us that unchecked desire operates the exact same way in human cognition. It starts small.
Like a minor craving.
Right, a passing thought or a slight annoyance that things aren't going your way. And if you leave it unattended, it wraps around your decision-making, your emotional baseline, and your peace of mind until you are completely choked by your own wants.
Which flows perfectly into the second part of that verse, the monkey seeking fruit in the forest. When I read that, I instantly thought of the modern dopamine loop.
Oh, it's a perfect parallel.
Yeah, think about a monkey in a canopy. It grabs a piece of fruit, takes a bite, drops it, and instantly swings to the next branch to find another one. It's not even enjoying the fruit it has, it's just obsessed with the act of seeking.
That is a flawless modern correlation. From a neurobiological standpoint, what you're describing is actually the dopamine reward prediction error.
The what?
The reward prediction error. We often think of dopamine as the pleasure chemical, right? But neuroscientists will tell you it's actually the seeking chemical.
Oh, yeah.
Dopamine spikes not when you get the reward, but when you anticipate getting the reward. It's the drive that makes you look for the fruit, not the satisfaction of actually eating it.
So we are all literally monkeys swinging through a digital forest.
Pretty much.
I mean, if you're listening to this, think about your own day. You finish a task at work, and instead of taking a breath and feeling satisfied, you instantly swing to the next branch. You check your email. Then you swing over to check your social media notifications.
And then you swing over to look at something you want to buy online.
Exactly. It is this erratic, frantic energy,
Yeah.
just constantly seeking the next hit of anticipation, the next spike of dopamine, and you never actually feel full. We are exhausted from the swinging.
We are exhausted, and the Dhammapada goes even deeper into the anatomy of this exhaustion. In verse 339, it describes this thirst as running towards pleasure with 36 channels.
36.
36. The imagery shifts from a forest to a flood. The channels run everywhere, the text warns, and the waves will carry away that misguided man. It's portraying this overwhelming sensory deluge.
36 channels. That sounds like a Tuesday morning on the internet.
It really does. We are constantly absorbing inputs that tell us we need more, we need better, we need different. We have channels of visual stimulation, auditory stimulation, social comparison.
Financial anxiety, status anxiety.
Right. The pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, it isn't a single manageable stream that you can just easily dam up. It's a massive delta of 36 rivers running everywhere. And modern algorithms are designed by very smart engineers to flood every single one of those channels simultaneously.
That paints an incredibly bleak picture, honestly. We're being suffocated by parasitic vines, we're monkeys trapped on an endless dopamine treadmill, and we're drowning in 36 rivers of algorithmic craving.
It sounds completely hopeless.
It does. But the text doesn't stop there. It offers a counterstate. Let's look at verse 336, which describes what happens when someone actually manages to interrupt this loop.
Yeah, verse 336 offers one of the most beautiful and visually striking contrasts in the entire text. It says, "He who overcomes this fierce thirst, difficult to be conquered in this world, sufferings fall off from him like water drops from a lotus leaf."
Like water drops from a lotus leaf. The visual of that impermeability is stunning.
It is. And if we break down the biology of the lotus leaf, the metaphor becomes even richer. The lotus is a powerful recurring symbol in Eastern philosophy, mainly because it grows in muddy, murky, stagnant water, yet the leaf and the flower emerge completely pristine.
Wow. Yeah.
Due to the microscopic physical structure of the leaf's surface, water simply beads up and rolls off. It physically cannot penetrate or stain the leaf.
So the psychological mechanism here is that suffering isn't an external force that attacks you. It's an internal adhesive that you generate, like the muddy water, the terrible boss, the financial stress, the rude person in traffic. That's always going to be there. The rain is always going to fall. But if you eliminate the thirst, the grasping, the desperate need for reality to conform perfectly to your expectations, you change the microstructure of your mind.
You become impermeable.
Exactly. The events happen, but the psychological agony simply beads up and rolls off.
You stop being a sponge that absorbs the world's chaos, and you become a lotus leaf that simply observes it passing over you. Recognizing that grasping is the first step. But, as the text readily acknowledges in the very same breath, this thirst is difficult to be conquered in this world. It is an active, daily, grueling struggle.
And I think to truly grasp just how grueling this struggle is, we have to look at the historical context. We need to understand the world the author was writing in, because we are throwing around metaphors like lotus leaves and monkeys, and it can sound very serene and pastoral.
Right.
But the reality of ancient India was anything but serene.
That is a crucial point. We need to ground ourselves in the human reality of the Dhammapada. The audience for this text was diverse, but it was heavily shaped by the ascetic traditions of ancient India. In chapters 21 and 23, we see frequent references to itinerant mendicants and monks in yellow gowns.
Right, and to a modern person, monk might conjure images of someone peacefully sitting in a quiet, climate-controlled room.
Yeah, maybe doing some light gardening and chanting.
Exactly.
But the reality was radical and physically terrifying. These were individuals who literally left their homes, renounced all family ties, gave up every single possession they own, and lived entirely on the charity of strangers.
That's hardcore.
They slept in forests, exposed to monsoons, extreme heat, and wild animals. They ate only what was placed into their begging bowls, meaning if the villagers had a bad harvest, the monks starved.
Wow.
They did this to cultivate absolute non-attachment, trying to escape the cycle of rebirth, the concept of being born again and again, into the inherent suffering of the material world, which is explicitly mentioned in verse 325.
The sheer physical vulnerability of that lifestyle is hard to even comprehend today. To intentionally strip away every safety net. But that wasn't the whole audience, right? The author wasn't just talking to hardcore ascetics.
No, not at all. The audience also included everyday lay people. You had merchants, farmers, soldiers, and kings. These were people struggling with basic morality, societal duties, taxes, and warfare.
So eye weeks.
Yeah, so the author uses a spectrum of imagery that resonates across all strata of society. You have the peaceful imagery of the forest, yes, but you also have the ultimate symbols of societal power, violence, and statecraft in that era. Kings, frontier forts, and tamed battle elephants.
That massive contrast really jumped out at me, because this is ostensibly a text about inner peace, compassion, and letting go. Yet the imagery is surprisingly aggressive. It's full of heavy, martial metaphors.
Oh, absolutely.
Like verse 315 talks about guarding yourself like a well-guarded frontier fort. Verse 304 talks about bad people being unseen like arrows shot by night. And verse 320 talks about enduring abuse like an elephant in battle, enduring an arrow sent from a bow. An elephant taking an arrow in combat. That is not a peaceful image. It feels like a war manual.
And that tension is brilliant and entirely intentional. Why use the brutal language of war to teach inner peace? Because the author wants to obliterate the illusion that mental liberation is easy.
Right.
We have this highly commodified modern view of mindfulness as a relaxation technique. We think of it as taking a warm bubble bath, putting on a meditation app for 10 minutes and, vibrating at a higher frequency.
The whole good vibes only,
Yeah.
toxic positivity culture.
Yeah.
If you just buy the right scented candle, you'll be enlightened.
Exactly. And the Dhammapada vehemently rejects that. The martial metaphors are there to tell you that attaining mastery over your own mind is a fierce, active, unrelenting war against your own lower nature. Your deeply ingrained habits and your ego are not going to surrender quietly. The mind is a hostile territory, and taming it requires the discipline, vigilance, and grit of a soldier defending a frontier fort under siege. You are constantly under attack by your own desires.
But recognizing that we're under siege doesn't actually stop the attack. Like, if the mind is this hostile territory, how does this ancient battlefield map onto our modern everyday lives? Most people listening to this are not wandering ascetics risking tiger attacks, and they aren't kings commanding battle elephants.
Right, they're sitting in traffic.
Yeah, they're sitting in traffic, they're managing stressed out teams, they're trying to get their toddlers to eat vegetables. How do we translate this?
Let's translate it through verse 326 from the chapter on the elephant. The text says, "This mind of mine went formerly wandering about as it liked, as it listed, as it pleased. But I shall now hold it in thoroughly, as the writer who holds the hook holds in the furious elephant."
The furious elephant.
Yeah.
That is the most accurate description of an untrained mind I have ever heard.
In ancient India, an untamed elephant in a state of fury was one of the most destructive forces imaginable. It could level a village, crush homes, and kill indiscriminately.
That's terrifying.
And the mind, when left entirely to its own devices, wandering as it likes, reacting violently to every impulse, indulging every passing emotion, is equally destructive to our internal landscape and our relationships.
I think about how a furious, untamed mind operates today. It destroys careers through impulsive email sent in anger. It destroys marriages through unchecked resentment or infidelity born of just a passing craving. It destroys physical health through the inability to control what we consume. The destruction is just as catastrophic as an elephant trampling a village. It's just happening in slow motion.
Exactly. Now look at the second half of the metaphor, the hook. The rider, or the mahout, uses a specific tool, an elephant goad or hook, to steer this massive, powerful animal. If we look at this through the lens of modern neuroscience, the furious elephant represents the amygdala and the basal ganglia, the ancient, primitive parts of our brain driven by emotion, fear, and deeply ingrained habit loops.
And the hook.
The hook represents the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, planning, and deliberate willpower.
So when you sit down to do deep work and you feel that almost physical itch to pick up your phone, that is the furious elephant trying to wander off to find some dopamine fruit.
Yes.
And the hook is the sheer cognitive effort it takes to say, no, we are staying right here. It takes massive energy to override that impulse.
It does. And the text offers a very blunt, deeply uncomfortable warning about what happens when we don't use that hook. Let's look at verse 325. It says, if a man becomes fat and a great eater, if he is sleepy and rolls himself about, that fool like a hog fed on wash is born again and again.
Ouch. A hog fed on wash.
Huh.
I read that and immediately felt personally attacked.
Well, it's designed to wake you up. Now, on the surface, this might seem like ancient dietary advice, but understood within the broader philosophical framework, this isn't just about literal food. It's a profound critique of mindless consumption and spiritual lethargy. What's fascinating here is how perfectly this diagnoses our modern trap of passive, numbing consumption.
I mean, I felt like that hog fed on wash just last night. I was lying in bed at 1 a.m., completely exhausted but unable to sleep, spending 2 solid hours scrolling through real estate listings in a state I don't even live in.
We've all been there.
My eyes were glazing over. I was totally numb, just consuming endless, meaningless data. It's exactly what verse 325 is talking about. You're consuming washed, low-quality, empty digital calories until you become intellectually and spiritually sleepy.
You roll about in a state of apathy, and the consequence listed in the verse is being born again and again. Literally, in the ancient context, this referred to the grueling cycle of reincarnation. But psychologically, in the 21st century, being born again and again is the feeling of being trapped in a repetitive Groundhog Day cycle of dissatisfaction.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
You wake up, you commute, you consume mindlessly to numb the stress, you feel empty, you go to sleep, and you repeat the exact same cycle the next day. You are trapped in your own loop.
But recognizing that we're acting like hogs fed on wash doesn't actually stop us from eating the wash. We need a mechanism to interrupt that cycle. If we want to grab the writer's hook, what does that actually look like in practice today? I think verse 290 from the miscellaneous chapter gives us the formula.
Yeah, verse 290 is key.
It says, if by leaving a small pleasure one sees a great pleasure, let a wise man leave the small pleasure and look to the great.
That verse is the ancient cornerstone of behavioral psychology.
It really is the ultimate statement on delayed gratification. We struggle so much to sacrifice short-term comfort for deep, meaningful long-term goals. The small pleasure is hitting the snooze button.
Right.
The small pleasure is eating the junk food or snapping at your partner in an argument because it feels powerful and vindicating in the moment.
Which is such a common trap.
Yeah, and the Dhammapada is urging us to cultivate the wisdom to see the great pleasure, the long-term peace of mind, the healthy body, the thriving marriage, the mastery of a complex skill. You have to willingly drop the small, immediate dopamine hit to achieve the lasting, profound state of well-being. But that requires fighting the elephant.
Which brings us to the actual physical mechanics of this fight, the practical application. How do we build the discipline to leave the small pleasure? Let's go back to that imagery of the mind as a fortress. Verse 315 says, like a well-guarded frontier fort, with defenses within and without, so let a man guard himself, not a moment should escape.
If you're listening to this right now, how do you build a frontier fort today? I love this concept because it's so tactical. You have to look at the 2 layers, defenses without and defenses within.
Exactly, the external and the internal.
Yeah, the defenses without are your external boundaries. It's the physical curation of your environment. If you know you're prone to distraction, your external defense isn't just trying really hard to focus. It's physically leaving your phone in another room while you work. It's using website blockers.
Setting up those barriers.
Right. If you know you're triggered into anger by certain political talk shows, your external defense is turning the TV off. You don't let the enemy inside the gates in the first place. You control the environment so the environment doesn't control you.
That is a perfect modern application of external defense. But, as we know, external defenses are never enough because the mind generates its own enemies.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You can lock yourself in an empty, silent room, and your mind will still conjure up anxieties, resentments, and cravings. So you need defenses within. This is the practice of internal vigilance, or mindfulness. It's the ability to observe a thought arising, say, a sudden surge of jealousy, or a craving for a drink, and catching it right at the gate of your consciousness.
The inner guard says, I see you. I acknowledge you're standing there, but I'm not opening the gate. I am not letting you into the citadel to take control of my central nervous system.
Exactly. That is what the text means by not a moment should escape. It requires constant self-monitoring. But beyond just guarding the fort, the text gives us a proactive strategy for eliminating the enemies entirely.
Okay.
Let's look at chapter 24, verse 337. It says, to dig up the root of thirst, as he who wants the sweet-scented Eucera root must dig up the Barana grass.
So what does this all mean? This is such a crucial botanical metaphor. Bharan grass was a common, very troublesome weed in ancient India, but it had a root system, the Usira root, that was highly valued for its fragrance and medicinal properties. If you wanted the valuable part, or if you just want to permanently kill the weed, you couldn't just skim the surface with a blade. You had to get your hands dirty, dig deep into the hard earth, and pull up the root.
Dig up the root. We spend so much time in modern self-improvement just trimming the leaves of our bad habits. We say, I'm going to stop eating sugar, or I'm going to limit my screen time to 1 hour a day.
But we're just mowing the lawn.
Yes. The Burana grass is just going to grow right back next week because the root of the thirst is still firmly planted underground. The active practice here is radical, uncomfortable self-inquiry. You have to ask why.
If you find yourself constantly checking your phone, digging up the root means asking, what am I actually avoiding by looking at this screen? Am I lonely? Am I terrified of my own silence?
That's a huge one.
If you're constantly seeking praise at work to the point of burning yourself out, what is the root? Is it a fundamental childhood ingrained feeling of inadequacy? You have to dig up the root of the thirst. You have to analyze the why behind the what. And that is painful, dirty work.
It is incredibly painful work. And, it is almost impossible to do when you are constantly surrounded by the noise and influence of other people.
Oh, for sure.
Which leads to another highly practical, though heavily debated prescription in this text. In chapter 23, the author gives very specific advice on our social environment. In verses 328 through 330, it lays out a clear, almost ruthless binary regarding who you spend your time with.
The companion verses. These are intense. The text says that if you can find a prudent companion who is wise and lives soberly, you should walk with them, overcoming all dangers, happy but considerate. Companionship with the wise is celebrated.
But then the alternative.
Right. But it continues, if you cannot find a prudent companion, let him walk alone, like a king who has left his conquered country behind, like an elephant in the forest. It states unequivocally, it is better to live alone. There is no companionship with a fool.
And we should clarify, the word fool here isn't an insult about intelligence. It refers to someone who is thoughtless, completely driven by thirst, and unaware of their own destructive habits.
Okay, but I have to push back on this a little bit. We live in a hyper-connected, collaborative society. We have teams at work, we have extended families, we have neighborhood associations. Walking alone like an elephant in the forest sounds incredibly romantic, but practically, how do we do that without just becoming total recluses, isolated and alienated from society? Are we supposed to just cut off everyone who isn't enlightened?
That is a very valid tension. If we read this purely literally, it leads directly to monastic isolation, which was indeed the literal path for the ascetics we discussed earlier. But if we extract the psychological mechanism, walking alone isn't necessarily about physical isolation. It is about intellectual and moral independence.
So it's an internal posture, not a physical location.
Yes.
Yeah.
It means not allowing your internal compass to be dictated by the crowd. In verse 347, the text talks about people who are slaves to passion running down with the stream. Society always has a stream. It has a default current of consumerism, superficiality, outrage, and comparison.
Yeah, that's undeniable.
Walking alone means you absolutely refuse to be dragged down by that prevailing current. You can be standing in a crowded boardroom, surrounded by people operating from ego, panic, and greed, and still be walking alone like an elephant in the forest, because your mind is sovereign.
Wow, okay.
You maintain your own internal standards. You don't participate in the office gossip. You don't get swept up in the collective anxiety. You are intellectually solitary, even when you are socially integrated.
I see. It's about not needing the validation of the crowd to justify your own peace. You are an elephant. You have your own weight, your own massive gravity. You aren't easily pushed around by the stream.
Beautifully put.
But even with that nuanced modern translation, we have to admit that some of this advice borders on the extreme. There are parts of this text that create serious friction. We have to look at the obstacles to growth within the text itself, the parts that modern readers might find deeply uncomfortable, jarring, or even offensive.
Yeah, and to engage honestly with any ancient wisdom, we can't just cherry-pick the aesthetically pleasing metaphors about lotus leaves and ignore the parts that challenge our modern sensibilities.
And there is plenty of challenge here. Let's start with chapter 22, the downward course. This chapter is full of intense warnings about punishment. Verses 306 to 310 explicitly warn that certain actions lead to hell.
Yes, the hell verses.
It says, he who lies goes to hell. He who covets his neighbor's wife gains bad reputation, punishment, and hell. It even says in verse 311 that badly practiced asceticism leads to hell. It's a very punitive, threatening framework.
The language is completely unsparing. For a modern reader, especially one who may have religious trauma or a deep aversion to dogma, the repeated threats of hell can cause an immediate psychological wall to go up. It feels entirely antithetical to the modern mindfulness movement, which is often framed entirely around non-judgment, self-compassion, and gentle acceptance.
Right. Nobody wants to open a book on inner peace and be told they're going to hell for a carelessly performed act, as verse 312 mentions. It feels regressive.
But we have to understand the mechanism of hell in this specific philosophical context. While ancient cosmologies did feature literal geographic realms of torment, in a psychological reading of this text, hell is a state of mind.
Okay, that changes things.
It is the immediate, unavoidable psychological suffering that follows unethical behavior. When the text says lying leads to hell, it doesn't mean a demon is going to torture you after you die. It means that the moment you tell a significant lie, you fracture your reality.
You create your own hell.
Exactly. You now have to expend massive cognitive energy to maintain the lie. You live in a constant state of hypervigilance and fear of discovery. You disconnect from authentic relationships because you are hiding. You have placed your own mind in a state of torment.
The punishment isn't delivered by a cosmic judge. It is the natural, biological consequence of acting against the harmony of reality. If you cheat on your spouse, the hell is the immediate destruction of trust, the anxiety, the guilt, the collapse of your home life.
Exactly. The text is simply stating a law of psychological physics. Action creates consequence. But there is an even larger obstacle in this text. Let's jump to chapter 24, verses 345 and 346, because I think this is the hardest pill to swallow in the entire reading.
The fetters. Yes, we have to talk about the fetters. The text talks about what binds us, what holds us back from true freedom. Verse 345 says, "Wise people do not call that a strong fetter, which is made of iron, wood, or hemp. Far stronger is the care for precious stones and rings, for sons and a wife."
It's a heavy verse.
And verse 346 continues, "That fetter wise people call strong, which drags down, yields, but is difficult to undo. After having cut this at last, people leave the world, free from cares, and leaving desires and pleasures behind."
This raises an incredibly important, almost insurmountable tension for a modern audience.
When I read that, I physically recoiled. To a modern person, the idea that loving your family, your children, your spouse, is a fetter, a chain dragging you down that must be cut so you can be free, is highly countercultural. It borders on psychopathic.
It certainly sounds cold to modern ears.
Yeah, because in modern psychology, strong familial attachments, deep bonds, and community are viewed as the absolute bedrock of a healthy, meaningful life, not a prison you need to escape. As impartial guides, we aren't going to tell anyone to abandon their family or reject the text entirely. But we have to explore why the author held this seemingly cold viewpoint.
And to understand the author's viewpoint, we have to return to the core premise of their reality, which is that all suffering comes from attachment and everything in the material world is subject to impermanence. The text views the world with unflinching, brutal realism.
Right.
Everything you love is going to age, get sick, and eventually die. Therefore, the deeper your attachment, the more profound your vulnerability. A chain made of iron can be broken with tools, but the love for a child, the devotion to a spouse, that is a chain that binds you to the deepest possible anxieties, fears, and eventual inevitable grief.
Because if you love someone that much, you are terrified of losing them. And eventually, through the natural course of life, you will lose them, or they will lose you. The author is looking at that equation and saying the only way to avoid the catastrophic pain of that loss is to never attach in the first place.
Exactly. The author is arguing that these beautiful, profound human attachments are actually the strongest anchors keeping you tethered to the suffering of the material world. To achieve absolute, unconditional mental liberation, nirvana, one must transcend even these deeply held bonds.
Okay, I understand the logic, even if I reject the prescription. So what is the value in the resistance? Why shouldn't a modern person just throw the book across the room when they read that?
I think the value is that it forces us to look at how our attachments drive our darkest fears.
Yes, that's the key.
I am never going to cut the fetter and leave my family to become a monk. I accept the vulnerability. I choose the pain of potential loss because the love is worth it. But acknowledging the author's truth helps me see why I am so anxious sometimes. It helps me realize that my profound love creates my profound fear. And that realization is the underlying, enduring value. If you understand that your attachment creates your fear, You can learn to love without suffocating possessiveness.
That's a great distinction.
Often our love becomes a fetter not because we love too much, but because we try to control the people we love to alleviate our own anxiety about losing them. If you can love your family while deeply acknowledging their impermanence, it actually makes you appreciate them more vividly in the present moment. It shifts the relationship from fearful grasping to profound appreciation.
That is a huge paradigm shift. It requires a lot of nuance. It requires us to read with discernment, separating the ancient lifestyle prescription, literally leaving your home from the core psychological insight about the nature of attachment and control. We have to extract the signal from the ancient noise.
Let's dig deeper into that discernment. How do we extract the enduring wisdom while acknowledging the limitations of the ancient setting?
Okay, let's unpack this. I found the perfect verse for this. Let's look at verse 302. Amidst all this lofty talk of liberation, the author has this moment of striking, relatable honesty.
I love verse 302.
Right. The text admits it is hard to leave the world. It is hard to enjoy the world. Hard is the monastery, painful are the houses, painful it is to dwell with equals, and the itinerant mendicant is beset with pain. Even the guy telling everyone to become wandering monks admits that being a wandering monk is absolutely brutal.
It is a phenomenal moment of transparency. The author is acknowledging that there is no geographical or lifestyle escape from the friction of existence. Hard is the monastery, painful are the houses. Whether you are living in a sparse, silent monastery or a comfortable, chaotic family home, human life involves friction.
Yeah.
Painful it is to dwell with equals, meaning anytime you have community, anytime you interact with other human beings, you have conflict, misunderstanding, and annoyance.
There is no utopia. So the enduring truth here isn't that you must literally become a monk to find peace, because even the monks are struggling with the exact same human condition. The literal renunciation of the world was a specific framework for a specific religious context in ancient India. But the internal renunciation is what applies today.
Precisely. We don't need to put on yellow robes and beg for our meals. The goal is mental sovereignty. It is about not being, as verse 342 brilliantly describes, a snared hare, terrified, thrashing around, and driven entirely by our immediate desires.
A snared hare. That's such a visceral image.
Yeah, and the internal renunciation is beautifully captured in verse 358, which says, "The fields are damaged by weeds, mankind is damaged by vanity. Therefore, a gift bestowed on those who are free from vanity brings great reward."
Renouncing vanity, renouncing the ego. That is the true work.
Yes. You can live in a modern city, work in a hyper-competitive 21st century boardroom, raise a family, and still practice this internal renunciation. You renounce the desperate need to always be right in an argument. You renounce the thirst for status and external validation.
You renounce the vanity that tells you the universe owes you a perfectly smooth, pain-free ride.
Exactly. That internal letting go applies perfectly to our modern lives without requiring us to physically leave the world behind.
And this pursuit of inner mastery over outer chaos, this profound realization that the mind is the only thing we can truly control in an uncontrollable universe, isn't entirely unique to this specific text or this specific region of the world. I want to shift into comparative insight, because examining how different cultures solve the same human struggle reveals universal truths.
What's constantly fascinating in these deep dives is how different wisdom traditions, completely isolated from one another by vast geography and centuries of time, arrive at the exact same conclusions about human nature.
It's mind-blowing. Let's go back to chapter 23, verse 320. "Silently shall I endure abuse, as the elephant in battle endures the arrows sent from the bow, for the world is ill-natured." When I read that, my mind didn't just stay in Eastern philosophy. I thought immediately of the Stoics.
Oh, absolutely.
I thought of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius sitting in a military tent on the Germanic frontier writing his meditations.
The parallel is impossible to ignore. Stoic philosophy, developed in ancient Greece and Rome, operates on the exact same fundamental premise. The world is largely out of our control and often hostile or ill-natured, as the Dhammapada puts it. Marcus Aurelius literally wrote journal entries to himself in the mornings, preparing his mind to face ungrateful, treacherous, and malicious people throughout his day.
Yeah, he knew it was coming.
Both traditions, independently of one another, concluded that you absolutely cannot control the arrows being shot at you by the world. The economy will crash, people will betray you, sickness will come. The only thing within your power is how you endure the arrows.
The tamed mind absorbs the shock without being derailed by it. And the Dhammapada and the Stoics both emphasize that your own actions are the true source of your peace or your torment. Look at verse 314. An evil deed is better left undone, for a man repents of it afterwards. A good deed is better done, for having done it, one does not repent.
It's very straightforward.
It is, but this isn't just ancient morality. This is the exact foundation of modern therapeutic practices. That reminds me specifically of cognitive behavioral therapy. In CBT, they teach that acting maliciously or acting against your own values creates an internal feedback loop of guilt that physically alters your baseline anxiety.
That is exactly how the mechanism works. In CBT, your behaviors, thoughts, and feelings are continuously feeding into each other. If you engage in a malicious behavior, an evil deed, it inevitably generates negative thoughts and feelings of shame.
You repent of it.
Right. You are literally punishing yourself through your own biology. You create your own psychological suffering. Conversely, acting in alignment with your values, a good deed, creates internal stability and self-respect. You cannot act maliciously in the world and expect to feel serene in your mind.
The universal ethical principle found across global traditions confirmed by modern psychology is that your actions dictate your internal peace.
Whether we are reading an ancient Greek philosopher, studying a modern cognitive therapist, or analyzing the author of the Dhammapada, the consensus is clear, undeniable, and universally applicable. True freedom is not, as modern consumer culture constantly tells us, the ability to fulfill every single desire you have. True freedom is the ability to not be ruled by those desires.
Yeah.
It is the absolute sovereignty of the mind.
Sovereignty of the mind. That is the ultimate goal, the frontier fort we are all trying to build. And that leads us to our final thought for this deep dive. If you're listening to this right now as you go about the rest of your day, I want to leave you with a final provocative reflection based on verse 353. The author writes, "I have conquered all, I know all. In all conditions of life, I am free from taint. I have left all, and through the destruction of thirst, I am free."
It's a profound statement.
It really is. Think about that for a second. Strip away the ancient context, strip away the monks and the elephants, and just look at your own life today. What would it actually feel like, just for one day, or even just for 1 hour, to completely drop the desperate need for things to be different than they are? Just stop wrestling with reality. To extinguish that thirst for more money, for better status, for later in the week, and simply be the tamed elephant resting quietly in the forest.
No swinging frantically from branches.
No suffocating creepers wrapping around your mind. Just existing, impermeable to the chaos, like water drops rolling off a lotus leaf. It is a profound, incredibly difficult challenge for the modern mind to explore, but it might be the most important work we ever do. That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.